Well, welcome to the podcast today. Thanks for being back. And I'm excited to be here with Roger Coles. He's a graphic designer, a family man. He's been in ministry for many years. And we're going to have a conversation today about things he's working on, things he's passionate about. And welcome to the show, Roger.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for jumping on. And how's life? How's 2020 treating you?
Oh, 2020 has been a wild ride for all of us, right?
Yeah.
I wonder how many of those New Year's resolutions just went out the door within the first 3 months of the year.
Exactly. And the planners and all the good intentions and the good plans just kind of like, oh.
Yeah. Well, fall's coming, so it'll make good bonfire material.
There you go. Exactly. Exactly. Cool. So just give us an overview of who you are and kind of what you do.
Yeah, man. So my name is Roger Coles, and I live in Northern Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C. I've been here pretty much my whole life. I have a beautiful wife and 2 kids and a cockapoo who's living up to the last half of her name. She's a puppy that we're trying to potty train right now. And her name is Jessie. I'm a credentialed minister and a web and graphic designer who's passionate about helping entrepreneurs share their message with the world.
Very cool. Very cool. And how long have you been a Christian?
Oh, man. Okay. So I grew up in church, kind of one of those stories.
Mm-hmm.
So at a very young age, came to faith in Christ and, grew up in church, went to a Christian school, graduated from that Christian school, went to a Christian university, graduated from the Christian university, immediately started working in the church. So I've been surrounded by all things church pretty much my whole life.
Yeah. Similar to me. It's tough when people kind of ask you for a testimony, and you kind of grew up in it. And that's kind of been a stumbling block for me. But I've also been reminded by other people who don't have that testimony that, growing up in the church that you have, that, you were uplifted and surrounded by God's faithfulness your entire life. And so you didn't have to come out of something. You just were in Jesus. And granted, I haven't been perfect. No one's perfect. But at the same time, I've never lost my faith or left my faith. I've had doubts and things like that, but it's still a testimony to the faithfulness of God, even when you grow up in church your whole life.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of things that he probably saved you from that you didn't have to pick up a lot of those things that were harder to break from. I mean, Like you said, we all kind of pick things up along the way, but yeah, I used to be envious of others too, that would have a crazy testimony and went, oh man, how come I wasn't like a drug dealer who would like stab people and stuff, man, that sounds way cooler.
Yeah. And you're like, wait a minute, what am I wishing for here?
Yeah.
I may not have made it through that to find the other side,
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you get started in graphic design?
Yeah, I picked up graphic design. I went to Bible college and I graduated with a degree in religion. And so when I came back from college, I started serving in my local church and helping the youth pastor who had actually been my youth pastor growing up. And we needed registrations and we needed a MySpace page and stuff like that. So he showed me a few things in Photoshop. And that's really where I got started, was just the few things that he knew. And then within a few months, I was showing him how to do things.
I haven't thought about MySpace in so long.
Yeah, that was like my first crack at any CSS or I guess HTML, playing around in that, because I was like, man, I want mine to look different than other people's. And I started doing custom banners and stuff like that. So that was like my first taste. And then, jQuery stuff and JavaScript, that all started to come into play. So yeah, that's kind of where everything started, was just, I stumbled upon it. I didn't really go to school to learn those tools.
Wow. That's so cool. And then now I think you've worked with YouVersion and Greg Laurie, and who else have you worked with?
Yeah. So I've done some work with TBN. They have a TV show called Better Together, and we just wrapped up, their website, I think within the last year or so. So there's been it's been crazy, because I never really thought that picking up graphic design would be something that would become my main source of income. And it's just been through God's provision that those relationships have happened. And all of those things came from relationship. And I believe that things move at the speed of relationship. So, people always ask me, how do I get started? And they want the tools and everything. Really, it's just like, start with what you have and with who you know.
Right. Yeah. And God will add to it in the faithfulness. That's awesome. Cool. So we've got some icebreakers here, kind of get to know you a little bit. So what would you say your favorite movie of all time is?
Okay. Favorite movie of all time would be between The Count of Monte Cristo
Ooh,
or The Greatest Showman.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Both of those.
Both those are
Both,
good.
I'm a musician, so I love the musical side of things. And I think that The Greatest Showman, when it came out, I was in a season where I was trying to start something from scratch. So I saw the movie, and you're watching this guy who's got this dream in his heart, and there's so many obstacles. I know it's not all real life
Yeah.
events. The movie doesn't quite live up to the way it actually went down, but it was an inspiring story for me. And then, of course, The Count of Monte Cristo is just this guy who was just a ship hand. He didn't have, massive education or anything. And he ends up getting done dirty. There's all this deception. He ends up wrongfully in prison. He gets an education there, becomes this wealthy guy, and exacts his revenge.
Yeah.
So both of those stories are just, they're just so well thought out.
Yeah. Yeah, the newer one with Jim Caviezel was great. And I used to watch even growing up. I think there was one in, I don't know, the 60s or 70s with Richard Chamberlain and Count of Monte Cristo. I used to watch that one. That was a really good one too. So that's
Yeah, I've
definitely one of
never
my
seen that
favorite.
one.
Probably doesn't hold a candle today, but back, growing up when you watch older movies and then you try to watch them now, you're like, wait, did I used to like that?
Yeah, I thought about watching Teen Wolf the other day, and I was like, I don't want
Oh
to
yeah.
ruin the memory.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happens. Well, cool. Who would you meet if you could meet anyone live or dead besides Jesus? Who would it be?
Okay, Alive or Dead. Louis Zamperini, I think he was, an Olympian who turned into this World War II pilot who his craft went down and he ended up lost at sea, and they had to survive on like birds that would just happen that they'd come across.
Wow.
And anything else that they could scavenge. They ended up in enemy territory. He became a POW. He was tortured like crazy. When the war ended, he came back home, and he was still traumatized from everything that had happened to him. But he met the love of his life, and as time went by, things started to get worse. He couldn't get rid of these flashbacks. It drove him to alcoholism. And then a guy named Billy Graham came to town,
Oh,
and his wife went to go to one of these revival meetings, and she got radically saved and came back home and was like, Louis, you got to come with me. And he didn't want to go. She dragged him there. And I think he ended up going a couple of times. And then at one of those meetings, he just had this encounter with God. He was delivered from all of the flashbacks that he had been having, and ended up writing a letter of forgiveness to the person who had been his greatest torturer. He was actually still alive. And so and then he turned into an evangelist because he wanted to give his life to sharing the gospel and helping others. So it's just such an inspiring story. And to be able to sit down with someone like that and not just read the book, but hear it from themselves,
yeah.
like the amount of endurance and stamina and grit and determination that you have to make it through all of those things, and then to not live a life of resentment, is such a powerful story that I'd love to be able to sit down and let some of that rub off on me. None of us want those stories, by the way. We are
Mm-hmm.
all in, because the only way you get that story is through pain and tragedy and stuff like that. And none of us want that. So I'd rather sit down with someone who's been through that maybe
Yeah,
and learn from those things.
exactly. And that was a movie too. I forgot the name of it.
Yeah, I can't remember. The book was Unbroken. Maybe it was the
Yes,
same.
I
Maybe
think
the
that
movie
was the
was the same
movie.
name.
Yeah, and I think they're making a sequel to it, like his life after,
Oh,
uh,
cool.
with the crusade that you're talking about and all that after the war.
Yeah, such a
Awesome.
great. So one of my favorite books that I've read, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, awesome. So what hobbies do you have?
Okay, hobbies that I have. I like to write silly songs, and I write songs about Doritos and Krispy Kreme. And when everything dropped, like back in March, I wrote a song called the Corona Rap, and I think it resonated with people. It didn't like completely go viral. I think it had like 26,000 views and like, close to 670 shares or something like that. So it
Yeah,
connected with people at some level. But
sure.
I think it was because that was the week that like March Madness shut down, and the NBA was talking about no longer having games. And so like all of this stuff that we had already kind of been nervous about was getting really, really real.
Yeah,
And it's a funny song, not making light of what's happening, but I think it broke the tension that week of what everybody was feeling.
right.
So I would say like writing funny songs like that, I really enjoy doing that whenever I have free time. And then, playing basketball, writing music, and just spending time with family.
I saw you collect Funko Pops. How
I
many?
do.
How many are you up to?
Oh, not nearly as many as I want. I have about 25 now, but if you went to my Amazon wish list, oh, dude, there's so many. I'm just like, why isn't anyone buying these for me?
That's funny. Yeah, I have all the James Bond ones. There's 15 of them because that's
Oh,
kind of what
cool.
I collect. But and then I have a few random one-offs here and there. But
Yeah.
you don't have like the walls in your house of them like some people do.
Oh, dude, I would. If I
Yeah.
could, I would.
So we'll share your wish list in the
Oh,
comments and the
please, in
notes.
the show notes,
People
yes.
can just show up at your door.
Hook a brother up.
Hilarious. Cool. So I ask everyone these questions. We're going to jump off to these. So a time then you had discernment in your life that, a time that God was leading you and you made a choice that either a good example of discernment and then a not so good example of discernment and kind of what you learned from it. So
Sure.
whichever one of those two you want to kick us off with.
Yeah, I may be able to do both. We'll see. I would say for a time with bad discernment was when I was serving as a worship leader. And there was this season where we had just a few people on our team that there was some tension with because of negativity or criticism. And I was going to other leaders in the church asking them like, hey, how do you think I should respond to this? With this one person, I was having the same meeting over and over. And I felt like we weren't able to resolve whatever it was. And so I went to one of the leaders in the church, and they weren't on staff, but they were, serving as one of the coordinators or directors, just in a volunteer capacity. But I really respected their leadership. So they gave me this advice. I said, I'm going out to lunch with this person today. What do you think I should do? And they gave me some advice that was not the right advice in that particular situation. And it reflected more their leadership style than it did for me. So sometimes when you try to take on other people's leadership style, it's like you're a little kid putting on your dad's oversized coat, just like David and Saul, like it just doesn't fit. But I didn't have the discernment, even though it didn't feel right to me to go, that doesn't sound like me. It doesn't sound like the way that I would normally respond. I trusted their leadership and I went ahead and followed their advice anyways. And it got really, really bad. And the relationship got more tense. And that person ended up leaving the church eventually over, it wasn't just that one incident, but it just didn't make things better. And so looking back on it, I would say the lesson that I learned is there are times where people are going to give you advice and they're invested in you, but they're not necessarily invested in that situation. They don't really have skin in the game. So they can just kind of give, yeah, this is what I would do. But you're the one that has to live with whatever decision that you make. And so if there's anything in you, if you feel like there's this discernment that just isn't quite sitting right, or there's an unsettled feeling, or you don't have peace about it, then it's okay to take that advice, listen to it, and not act on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because like you said, a lot of times people are, aloof to the situation. They don't necessarily know all the details. And then we just come up to them and say, hey, what would you do? And it's so easy to say, well, I would do this without actually having to live it out. And so whatever the situation might be, we can get discernment from relationships, but it's not the end all be all where we have to go to God. We have to go to the Bible. We have to be, whatever the Holy Spirit's trying to impress upon us in that situation to have discernment and to have wisdom and to make sure that we don't, destroy a relationship or we don't act in a way that, I work in the corporate world. So, there's so many things that sound so good on paper. And then when you try to execute them, they just don't, work out very well. And a lot of times the same way, in the Christian walk or the church, things sound good on paper, but then when you actually try to implement them, they may not, be executed like they sound.
Sure.
And so that's a really good word of wisdom.
Yeah. And then I would say, an example of good discernment would be, well, aside from getting toilet paper before it was all gone, I was like, yo, I have a feeling.
You have a room dedicated to it, huh?
I was ready. Ready. So when everybody was like, I don't have any toilet paper, I was like, well, I got some. And so aside from that, I would say, when I was 5 years old is when I initially felt called to ministry. And I was in my grandma's driveway and I remember feeling like God had spoken to me. And I didn't have a dad who was a pastor. There was no one in my family who was like serving in ministry that I was looking up to going, I'm going to be like that person. It was just this moment where I just felt like there was like this internal stirring. And so I asked my mom and my grandma, like, how do you know if God is talking to you? Because I feel like he just told me that I'm supposed to be a pastor. And so, time goes by, sports kick in. I want to be a basketball star. Michael Jordan's hot at the time. I'm like, I'm going to Georgetown. That's where Allen Iverson went. Then I'm going to the NBA. Now, reality was that at the time, I grew 4 inches after I graduated high school. But in high school, I was like 5'8". I was just a mediocre basketball player, but I had high hopes. So when I went to Liberty University, I was a sport management major. And as time went by, I started to get involved in ministry teams where we would go and do Disciple Now weekends, which is kind of like in Baptist world, they would have these retreat weekends where a college team comes in, we do music, we do really terrible skits, and
Human
really
videos.
awful music, but we would just do the best that we could to pour our lives into these kids and to kind of help them connect their faith with what was happening in the church. And so that ended up being something that, as I was there, I also, around that same time, I went to a sports conference. And between the two, I went, going to the sports conference does not light me up. It doesn't quite feel like this is what I'm meant to do. But when I'm on these weekends, spending time pouring out the word of God into these students and connecting with other believers in that way, there's something there. And so I ended up changing my major from sport management to religion. And thankfully, I was still able to graduate on time.
Yeah. Wow. That's impressive right there.
Yeah, it was rough. I remember being on spring break, and this was before we didn't have like a flip down TV to watch DVDs. My friend brought his like straight up television in the van. We drove from Virginia to Florida for spring break, and I'm watching all these distance learning tapes because I had to do additional courses. And so I felt bad for them because they're like, I had the most boring professors spitting out information. I'm taking notes because I was like, I got to graduate on time. This is my last chance to get these courses in. So it was hard, but I did it.
That's so cool that you had that calling from God at such a young age, and it took a while to live it out before it came to fruition. And it's a good reminder that, well, first of all, God's callings and gifts are irrevocable, as the Bible says. And then also, God may impress upon us something, but a lot of times we want it to happen now, but
Yeah.
God's timetable is so different than ours. So even if he gives you a glimpse of something that he wants you to do or wants you to be involved in, or a breakthrough that's going to happen, a lot of times it takes longer than we want because we're in a fast food culture that gets things our way right away.
Yeah.
But God's timetable, I mean, you look at Joseph and how long he was in prison and had to go through so much to save his family, basically, and save Israel.
Yeah.
And, I'm just reminded in my life too, where it's like, all right, God, you said this was going to happen and it's been 2 days. Where is it? And
yeah. Come on, let's get on it.
Let's get on it. So, but yeah, patience is a virtue that I think we can all work on, especially in the culture we're in.
For sure.
Cool. So you were a youth pastor, you said. How long was it a few years?
Yeah. So I was a youth pastor for about 3 years. And then my wife and I stepped out and started doing itinerant ministry. So that's one of the things that we connected with a guy named Matt Brown. We went to India together and we did ministry over there. It was just a short trip for like 10 days or something like that. And,
Awesome.
And then when we were flying back from that trip, right before we had left, my youth pastor had said, I'm praying about planting a church and I want you to pray about this with me. And as we were flying back from India, we got over the area of Northern Virginia and we saw just this sea of houses and how crowded and congested this area is. And my wife and I were like, this is the next step for us. And so we went from being youth pastors to kind of traveling evangelists, worship leaders, and then on staff at a church plant. And we served there for about 10 years.
Wow. Very cool. Matt's been on the podcast too. So if you're listening and you haven't checked that out, make sure you listen to that episode.
Yeah. Shout out.
So since you've worked with the youth and been in ministry and things like that, what has been your perception of the youth as far as what connects with them? What ways Christians can engage with the youth today and connect with them as well? Apart from a program, which may or may not work, what are some real ways, whether we have kids, whether we're in the church and see kids running around? I mean, what are some practical ways Christians can have discernment about how to, because we would all agree that it's important to guide the next generation, but a lot of times that's not for me, that's not my calling. We make excuses instead of, well, it doesn't mean you have to be a youth pastor, but what are some practical things that we can do?
Yeah. Yeah, when I first became a youth pastor, I was fresh out of college. So I was still young and closer in age. And I think that I felt like that was the thing that gave me an edge with students. But now that time has gone by, I think that was definitely one of the tools in my tool belt. But I don't think that was the thing that helped me the most. I think the thing that helped me the most was that I would just listen
Mm,
and give them an opportunity to share about what was happening in their lives, and not to necessarily, condemn them for decisions that they were making, but to lovingly point them in the right direction and point them towards the word of God. And this is what the word of God has to say about what you're dealing with right now. So giving them an opportunity to share, being there to listen, and then creating an environment where it's safe for them to share without that fear of being judged. Because
mm,
even having kids now, you can see that when your child does something that they shouldn't do, the reason that they're not always forthcoming is because they're worried about the consequences. And
mm.
there are always going to be consequences. But if we can create an environment where they know that whatever is done is always done in love, and that they can come to you with anything, then that creates a much healthier relationship. And so I think that's also important for anyone that's serving with youth or young adults, just creating that space where they feel like they can share things with you without that fear of judgment.
Yeah, that's a good word. And a lot of the youth, I mean, youth in general, we've all done it, are so good at hiding things, especially from their parents. And when
Hmm.
things come to light, the parents are the first ones to say, I had no idea my child was involved in that. And so
Right.
if they don't feel comfortable coming to their parents, which is somewhat natural, that they want to
Hmm.
hide it from them, where is the avenue where they can come out with that? Is it with their friends? Is it on social media, or is it in the
Hmm.
church? And you would hope that it would be in the church, where they could come to somebody, pastor or not, and say, I'm struggling with this, I have these doubts, I have this pressure, I have this, you name it, what
Hmm.
should I do?
Yeah.
Because if they don't come to the church, if they don't get direction and guidance from the church, they're going to get it from the wrong sources, and just get
Hmm.
further down the rabbit hole of whatever they're struggling with. And so I think too, as a parent myself, to make sure that we're so quick to, I think, condemn our kids in, well, that's wrong, and then just go to your room or punish, but well, why did you make that decision? What was the heart behind it? Did you know it was wrong at the time? Was
Hmm.
it an act of rebellion, or was it an act of, you didn't have all the information, or maybe I didn't take the time myself to explain this to you, or walk it out with you.
Mm.
Um, and granted, there's time and a place for stricter punishment and things like that, but at the same time, like you said, if we're all about punishment and condemnation, we're going to create a culture in our own families and in our church where they don't want to bring it out, because it's going to
Hmm.
get squashed. It's going to get,
Yeah.
well, here's a Bible verse of why you're wrong. And and that's why Matt Brown's book, Truth and Love, is so important too, because
Hmm.
uh, we can share truth for days, especially to kids, but if we don't mix it with love, they're just going to feel condemnation,
Sure.
whether we're right or not. And being right's not the point. It's about a balance between the two, and making sure that I think that we just hold their hand through the process and make sure they know that I'm for you, not against you. I want
Mm.
to see you on the other side of this, a
Yeah.
better person, a better, whatever, what I'm trying to
Hmm.
say. So,
Yeah. And I think that the other thing that we can do is, there's something beautiful called the gift of going second. And it's when you're talking with someone, they say something that maybe you want to say, but you're afraid to say it. It could be something that you're struggling with, or a vulnerability that you don't want others to know about. And the second they say that thing, you go, me too. I didn't know anyone else struggled with that. All right.
mm,
Didn't know anyone else thought that way. And when I think back on the people that I connected with, or wanted to ask for advice on something, it's almost always that they've been through it. And the only reason I know that is because they shared about whatever that struggle was.
mm,
So, my wife and I, we went through some hardships, and, lost pregnancies and stuff like that. The people we called on were the people that we knew that had shared about those things.
mm.
And so I think being authentic, any pastor that gets up from the pulpit and talks about a vulnerability, when you talk with someone who's talking about the anxiety or depression that they feel,
Yeah.
those are people who you end up going to and saying, man, how did you deal with that? Because that's something that I'm struggling with also. So I think we can also give youth and students the gift of going second by us being okay to be vulnerable and share some of the things that we're also working through.
Yeah. And that we've been there too, that maybe we came out of it, we are either currently struggling with it, or we've been there and we know what
Mm,
it's like, and I know exactly what you're feeling, and it's okay because I've been there. And that goes a long way too, as opposed to we put on an air that, like you said, the pastor's perfect, the parent's perfect, and that's not true. But a lot of times we feel like we can't be vulnerable because we'll be looked down upon, or we'll be
mm,
condemned, or whatever excuse we make. It
mm-hmm.
is important to be vulnerable and not have to share every detail of our life, but also to make sure that we know that um, we've all been on a journey of hills and valleys, and ups and downs in our Christian walk, and just in our human walk. And so those that are coming up behind us need to have that discernment in order to say, who can I go to? Like you said, who
Mm-hmm.
has struggled with anger, with lust, with suicidal
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, with all these things that, and sin loves to make us feel isolated. It loves to
Yeah.
make us feel like we're the only ones that ever faced it. And we know that's not true, but the feeling is real. And the
Mm-hmm.
feeling is like, I need to hide it because no one else, I'm terrible and no one else can understand.
Yep.
And if we realize that the youth especially are feeling that, then maybe
Mm-hmm.
we'll ask more open-ended questions. Maybe we'll be an active listener. Maybe, like you said, go second, and then be like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and be more
Mm-hmm.
encouraging about what they're facing instead of the opposite. So
Yeah,
awesome.
for sure.
Cool. So being a social media designer, I'm curious, because this is something that I've seen grow, especially during COVID, with churches scrambling to
Oh yeah.
get an online ministry and to do live streaming and all that kind of stuff. So can
Yeah.
you speak about the importance of social media in general in ministry and also in churches going forward?
Yeah, I think that the way we use social media has changed because it used to be more just a commercial and we're pushing knowledge at people. Now it's becoming the primary way that we connect with our people, because in places where they're still not able to gather in person, some people are doing outdoor meetings and they're finding creative ways with social distancing to make that happen. But now social media is truly becoming its own ministry. And I joke with my wife all the time that when all this stuff hit, anyone who was in like a creative pastor, social media manager type of a role, they probably finally got all the things that were on their budget list that they wanted, but they just didn't have budget for, because now we've got to figure out a way to live stream. Now we've
Yeah.
got to find a way to connect with our people online. So I think that, you know, being able to use stories, reels is a new thing, finding creative ways to use reels. I've jumped on that. I'm doing a 30-day challenge right now, which is really, really difficult doing it every day, but it's also stretching me in a number of ways.
Hmm.
Um, Finding ways to connect with people that isn't just a commercial, because we can no longer plug our Sunday morning service. We can no
Yeah.
longer plug our Wednesday night service. Some people can, but I think that that's not helping people anymore. And we have seen this. It's been so cool to see, watching some of these live stream services and the videos, the pre-roll videos that would play before a service starts. It would always be like the lights and the stage and the people lifting their hands on the stage and stuff like
Hmm.
that. Well, that's not happening anymore. So we have to make this reflect what's real. And so I've seen more pre-roll videos of people like sitting around a living room or trying to have like a Zoom meeting, small group that
Yeah.
way, or online prayer meetings. So I think utilizing social media to do those kinds of things, going live, having your pastor go live is always going to be great. If you can live stream your sermon, then that's going to be, another great way to connect with people. But then outside of that, don't just connect still only on a Sunday morning, because if Facebook was a country, it'd be the largest country in the world. Like, that's where people are right now.
Yeah.
And so if you can connect with them through your live streams, if you can have prayer meetings, small groups, a lot of people are doing like Zoom small groups, finding ways to make that kind of stuff happen. We have to keep our people connected, because right now anxiety is through the roof, suicide is through the roof, and people need more hope now than ever before. And so if social media, if Facebook is the largest country and that's where people are, that's where we have to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And so many churches, like I said, have scrambled to do it, but also the positive of it is that more people are hearing the gospel than ever before with the ability to stream, with the ability to have all these online avenues for people to connect with, and people are going to
Mm-hmm.
churches that they don't even aren't even in the same state for
Yep.
because because of the live stream. And so I think in the church I'm at, we're looking at this too, is that you know, how can we continue to grow this? And when I look at the
Mm-hmm.
way the youth consumes social media, and they love small clips. TikTok is
Yep.
so huge, and then you said reels and all these avenues where people just watch a 15-30 second video and then they move on. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard, I think, especially for the youth, to engage in an hour sermon.
Yeah.
um, but they can definitely, throughout the week, why don't pastors put up, like, here's a minute video of what God's doing in this church, what God's doing in my heart, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to share that with you. And maybe 2-3 days a week, the different pastors chime in about a 1 minute clip of something, and then,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, Zoom meetings. I mean, there's so many things out there that I don't even think, I don't even know, but I think most churches aren't exploring all those options. And
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing to keep in mind as we live streams are not going away, but
Mm-hmm.
social media is not going away either. And like you said, if Facebook is so huge, how can we tap into that and make it for the glory of God and not just for whatever else you see on Facebook?
Yeah. And I would say, just to piggyback off what you're saying, to think in terms of bite-sized content, because one of the sad things that we've seen is that some of the viewing has gone down. There was initial spike when all these online services began, and then it started to kind of dwindle off,
Yeah,
and I think that's normal. It's kind of like this novelty kind of thing of, oh, my church is online,
yeah,
but after a while, even that, or you just forget, oh, I forgot to set my alarm. I missed all 8 services that they were streaming today somehow because I was watching Netflix or whatever. So
yeah.
finding ways that you can create bite-sized content. And another thing that I haven't really seen anyone do, I'd love to see churches tap into something like ManyChat. You've got all these great like messenger bots right now,
Mm,
and the open rates are insane on those things. If you look at doing email marketing, you might get maybe 20% open rate. If you look at what you're doing with a messenger bot or inbox on Facebook, the open rates spike to like 80 and 90%. There's something
wow.
about having something in your Facebook that you're more likely to open. And then, of course, like Gmail might send it to spam or promotions tab or whatever. They may never even see it.
Right.
But being able to use something like that, and I thought, what if, because it is something that could be going nonstop, someone comes to your Facebook page, they type in a comment, and it can lead them down all of these different sequences. So if they're struggling with anxiety, bam, 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 it takes them
Mm,
down this track. If they're struggling with lust, it takes them down this track. You can create, playlists for it, or devotionals. Here's our top 3 YouVersion devotionals dealing with this particular subject. And that stuff can all happen automated. Now, of course, you want a real person interacting in there at some point, but using technology and the automation side of things to give people resources for where they're at. We live in an on-demand world, and so the church could really utilize that to resource people.
yeah, that's good. That's exciting how the church can evolve during this time to accommodate some of those needs. And that's a lot of how people search for churches, is they look for divorce care, or they look for programs
Mm-hmm.
with the area of their life they're struggling in. And so, like you said, a lot of people search for anxiety or depression or things like that. And so they don't necessarily care that the next sermon's going to be on Hebrews. They want to know, how can this
Mm-hmm.
church help me with where I'm at and pull me out?
Yeah.
And a lot of our marketing, I think, should cater to that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So along the lines of social media, one of the things I was thinking about recently was how, with a lot of schools not going back in session, we have youth
Mm-hmm.
with more devices than ever before, with
Mm.
laptops and screens in front of them. And whether it's for the youth or just for Christians in general, social media is so prevalent, and it can be used for good, but it also unfortunately can be used to control us. And so, how do we have discernment with social media to ensure that we're controlling it, to make sure that it doesn't get a hold of our children, and to make sure we keep it in its proper place?
hmm Yeah, I think that this is such an important issue, and being self-aware is a big one on this. So if you start to notice that you're feeling a little grumpier than normal or a little angrier than normal, then think about what was the trigger that caused that. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been on social media and I've been scrolling and I start to feel a certain way,
Mm,
anxious. Maybe I saw, and I'm like, why am I feeling this way? And it was because of something 5 posts up that I had already scrolled by,
yeah.
but that feeling lingered and it stayed there because of whatever it was that I saw. So there are certain things that are going to cause triggers. And what I've learned, I just read this book called Contagious, and there are certain things that go viral. The whole book's about why things go viral.
Mm.
So you'll see a video of a really adorable kitten, that thing goes viral. But then you'll also see things that will make you angry or make you fearful. And the studies have shown that those things that are positive, if there's something that causes anxiety or anger, they will also go viral.
Mm.
And so when you get on social media, and we're at the time that we're recording this, it's 2020, we're in the midst of an election and pandemic, all of that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff going on where fear and anger are heightened. And think about the stuff that you're seeing go viral. What's getting rewarded by the algorithms are the things that are causing people to engage and comment. And
Mm.
usually it has something to do with a mask or a particular presidential candidate. And those things stir up anxiety and anger. So being able to be self-aware and go, wait a minute, why do I feel the way that I feel? What was the trigger that caused this? And is there something that I can do so that the next time that something like this happens, I won't respond in this way? And sometimes that means deleting the app off of
Mm.
your phone.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means just taking a break and walking away, or looking at your phone and seeing the screen time. If you have an
Yeah.
iPhone, you can see exactly how you spent your time.
Yeah.
And there's probably other apps. I think there's another app. It starts with an M, but I can't remember. If you're on a Droid, you could download that, and it just breaks down how you're using your screen time. And I think it's a really healthy thing to limit those things. So even in the mornings, like, don't get on social media first thing if that's something that triggers you. If you know that you're going to have a bad day because you got on Facebook and saw someone say something really stupid, then just don't get on there. Start your morning with prayer, or start it with reading a devotional, reading through the Word of God, and then take a shower, brush your teeth, set limits on when you spend time so that you know that you're going to be able to stay emotionally and mentally healthy for those times that you do jump on.
That's so good. And I feel like you're speaking right to me there, because I have the same thing where I know it's not good for me to, do it right away in the morning, but it's so hard, when you grab your
Mm-hmm.
phone for the alarm and then you see your notifications, and then, then you start getting, it's such a buzzword, but triggered is a good word for it, because I've
Mm-hmm.
done the same thing where I've scrolled through something and then I'm like, why am I feeling this right now? And then I think back, like go back in the file folder in my brain is like, what
Yep.
did I hear? What did I see that is now making me feel this? And I've done the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a good idea to take a break. When you come to the point where, like, I'm out of control almost, I need to delete this. It
Yeah.
sounds extreme, but if that's where you're at, then do it,
Mm-hmm.
or at least find a way to unplug for a few days. We were just camping, and I didn't know it was going to be Wi-Fi less, but there was no cell signal, no Wi-Fi, and it was 4 days without it, and it got me realizing how much I kind of just grabbed my phone to
Yeah.
see, and then, okay, I can't do anything with it. Let's put it down and do something more constructive. But
Mm-hmm.
um, it's good to know, and I'm not going to. Neither one of us are going to say, like, you have to do these steps and you're going to be free of social media anxiety. No, like, you have to
Mm-hmm.
know yourself. You have to know what triggers you. You have to know why you need to be on it in the first place. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we have ministries online. We have to be on there to a point.
Yep.
But we don't have to let it control us either way. And that's not an excuse to let it, you know, move us to sin or move us to those thoughts that kind of lead us down a path that's not good for us. So
Mm-hmm.
great.
Yeah. And turn off notifications if you can. If you don't
Yes.
need them on,
Yeah,
just turn them off.
for sure. Cool, Roger. Well, that's coming to the end of our time, and I want to thank you for being on, and give you a chance to plug anything you're working on, or ways people can connect with you.
Yeah. So one thing that I'm really excited about right now is I just launched my new website, mysocialdesigner.com, and it's creative templates for digital entrepreneurs. So anyone who has a podcast, or if they're releasing a webinar, or they're a social media manager or a content creator, there's going to be a lot more resources here over the next few months that will be building up that database just to help entrepreneurs to save time and to save money and to look good doing it.
Awesome. Cool. Everyone check that out. I'll put it in the show notes. And again, thank you for coming on. God bless you and your ministry.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Everyday Discernment Podcast. For more information on Discerning Dad, go to discerning-dad.com. Be sure to follow on all the social media platforms. Just search for Discerning Dad. Please share this podcast with a friend and leave an honest review on whichever platform you listen. Feel free to send any comments, suggestions, questions, or prayer requests at discerningdad@outlook.com. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.